Pep Guardiola has been discussing star man Kevin De Bruyne. He was asked if he expects any of his players to depart the Etihad this transfer window.
I don't know what's going to happen in the market, but the squad is long enough. If someone leaves, we are going to talk about that. Of course, until the last day we have chances. I don't rule it out, the option to have any new players, but if anyone leaves, I think 95% will have the same squad.
Interesting. So they will have predominantly the same squad. Okay, right. If someone leaves, and I think a few players will leave, but they won't be necessarily first choice players at Manchester City. Firstly, Rory, on the news that Kevin De Bruyne will stay at the club. That is what Guardiola said a little bit earlier on. He was asked about him. He said he's staying, right? Okay, that's good news for Manchester City, I think. Not necessarily maybe what Kevin De Bruyne would want, particularly given he could get a huge offer from Saudi Arabia. Do you think that at the moment it's just talk from Guardiola, and if there's a big offer, he'd still be happy to move De Bruyne along?
I think so. I think that Kevin De Bruyne is undoubtedly, one of the best players to have ever played in the Premier League, but his influence and impact has been waning for a few years now. And Manchester City have won the league without De Bruyne. Last year, De Bruyne wasn't their best midfielder. He wasn't their most important midfielder. At various points, they've been a better team without him in it. And don't get me wrong, he is fantastic. And having a player like De Bruyne around can always be a good thing. Around the squad, around the camp, somebody who sets a standard, somebody who knows a standard, somebody
Rory,
who can... Go on.
Don't be disrespectful.
I don't think he's the player that you think he is anymore.
You're making out he's past it.
I'm making out that Phil Foden is better than him, and therefore...
He's not.
He is.
He's not.
Phil Foden is a better player than Kevin De Bruyne as of today.
No, he's not.
He most certainly is. I know that Phil Foden didn't perform as well as we would have hoped at the European Championships,
Listen,
but he
I
was
love
unplayable.
Phil
Foden was unplayable last season. Absolutely unplayable.
Love Phil Foden. He had, for me, almost a breakout season in many ways in terms of what we know he's capable of, and he hasn't consistently delivered in the other seasons of his career. He's been fantastic for short periods. He's done great things. Last season, he put it together for a full campaign. He was absolutely fantastic. Mm-hmm. Are you telling me if you got a cup final at the weekend and there is a choice for you between Kevin De Bruyne and Phil Foden, you can only have one, that you would truly still select Phil Foden over Kevin De Bruyne?
Well, if you've got a European Cup final, Kevin De Bruyne will probably go off injured. So I'd certainly.
So you are going to be disrespectful when it comes to Kevin De Bruyne?
No, I'm just going to speak about the reality of today rather than the player that he is in terms of what he's achieved in the past. And the player that he is today, Phil Foden, is a more significant player, a more impactful player, and a more important player for Manchester City. Do you agree that there's only room for one of them in the team?
No.
So you can play them both?
I think you can. I don't think Manchester City are better without Kevin De Bruyne. He's not going to last forever. That is absolutely clear. They, as a football club, do need to think about the future. Clearly, the future is more likely to be Phil Foden. But if it was me and I had the choice between one of those two players, I'm picking Kevin De Bruyne still.
I think that's wild.
Wild?
I think it's wild. It's not Kevin De Bruyne anymore. It's not. It's Kevin De Bruyne for sentimentality. It's Kevin De Bruyne for previous performance. But it isn't Kevin De Bruyne today. Off the back of the season that Phil Foden just had, he was completely unplayable. Every single time Manchester City needed an answer, the answer was Phil Foden. Whether it was a winner, whether it was an assist, whatever it was, Phil Foden was the catalyst for Manchester City winning 4 in a row.
Were they a better team this year, truly, winning one Premier League title when Phil Foden was a key player, when the season before when Kevin De Bruyne was a key player, they were winning a treble?
Kevin De Bruyne isn't the player that he was 2 years ago. We've had an entire season without De Bruyne's influence.
I don't think Manchester City were better when he wasn't having the influence that he had the year before. I don't think they were a better team winning just a Premier League title last year.
The fact that we're talking about De Bruyne going to Saudi Arabia tells us exactly where he is in his career, tells us exactly what he's thinking about his career.
That's fine. Money's a big influence in that. No,
it's also about ambition. It's also about... Yeah, of course it is. Of course it is. Kevin De Bruyne, at the peak of his powers, isn't considering going to Saudi Arabia regardless of the money.
No, I understand that. Clearly he understands how old he is, but he's not making a decision based on how good he is right now. He knows he could still play. He could still play at the top level for another few years.
Kevin De Bruyne's injury record is getting more significant year in year. He's always been fairly injured, fairly injury prone. That's getting more and more significant. We're now at a stage where he misses more games than he plays.
I still think you'd put him in the category of one of the world's best. Kevin De Bruyne.
In terms of legacy, not in terms of today.
Kevin De Bruyne, one of the world's best central midfield
If there's only
players.
room in the team, look, you threw me a curveball because you suggested that you could play them both. In my opinion,
I still think you can.
In my opinion, I could be wrong. In my opinion, there's only really room for Phil Foden or Kevin De Bruyne.
Who do you
And
think
if it's
Erling
one
Haaland would rather be playing with, if you could choose one?
I think that the relationship that Kevin De Bruyne and Erling Haaland had 2 years ago, Kevin De Bruyne, that assist
But
that we
Foden
saw
didn't match that, did he?
No.
Okay.
That relationship was one of the best. Like that Kevin De Bruyne right-footed cross from the right that would ultimately be volleyed in by Erling Haaland's left foot. We saw that so often. And that relationship is something that will probably never be matched again.
I still think now, and maybe it's a silly thing to say when I say on his day he's one of the world's best, because you're going to tell me that day doesn't come that often.
I would agree with you. On his day, he is one of the world's best. And then I would ask
But
you,
I wouldn't say
how
that
often
about
is
Phil
his
Foden.
day? No, fine. If you're telling me that,
And I love Phil
peak
Foden.
of the powers next season, going into the next season for Manchester City, peak of their powers, would you rather have Kevin De Bruyne or Phil Foden in the team? I'd say Kevin De Bruyne. But then I would ask you, realistically, how many times are you going to get Kevin De Bruyne peak of his powers? If you're lucky, 10?
But if I'm Pep Guardiola, for this 1 year, if I've got a choice between one more year of Kevin De Bruyne, he leaves the club on a free, or 50 million quid for him now, I'd keep him.
Of course you would if you're Pep Guardiola, because Pep Guardiola doesn't need to care about the money. But if you look at football through the lens of being
Manchester City.
No, but if you're Manchester
City,
effectively what you've said there is you write off 50 million quid
and his
for
salary,
the sake of 10 games.
And his salary. For 10 games?
Oh, how many games do you think he'll play next season? How many games did he play last season?
If we're going to go out, if Pep Guardiola is going to go out with possibly a Champions League in his final game, Champions League title, you need Kevin De Bruyne. They ain't winning it without him.
Manchester City aren't winning the Premier League without Kevin De Bruyne.
No, Champions League.
They aren't winning the Champions League without Kevin. I mean, I think they certainly can. I mean, they did.
They can.
They did as well, didn't they?
No.
They won the final.
He did. All right, he went off early. Yeah, again. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they can win.
But they can reached the final with Kevin De Bruyne.
Manchester City with Pep Guardiola are obviously capable of winning the Champions League with or without Kevin De Bruyne, with or without Phil Foden, probably with or without Erling Haaland, or with or without anyone, because they are so lavish.
You said this year they weren't at their best. They weren't at their best. Kevin De Bruyne wasn't at his best. They didn't win the Champions League. When he was, they did.
You know when you said the 50 million quid? Kevin De Bruyne played. So I've said, take the 50 million quid. Yeah. Kevin De Bruyne played last season, and bearing in mind this is another year older, so let's assume it will be less. Kevin De Bruyne played last season 15 games for Man City. His wages plus 50 million quid.
All season, 15 games.
15 Premier League games.
We're getting this checked.
We're getting this checked.
Started 15.
Started 15. Yeah. Started 15.
Yeah, he had an injury hit campaign.
And he's now played in a European Championship, so the summer, so less recuperation, and he's a year older. I'm just. I
would say this,
the law of gravity suggests, the sands don't flow up the hourglass.
Actually, watching De Bruyne towards the end of last season and at the Euros, to be fair to him, he's coming back to some kind of physical form. So clearly the injuries did affect
Watching
him.
Watching him at the Euros?
What do you mean?
How do you think he played at the Euros?
There.
No, of course you were.
I don't think he played badly.
Do you think he played badly? Do you think he played well?
Yeah.
I think the whole of Belgium played badly.
Well, I don't think he was the worst player in the team. I think he was one of the best performers in the Belgian team.
Okay, I mean, this is fine. Maybe he was. Maybe he was one of the. Maybe he was one of the best performers in the worst performing team.
Yeah, fine. I think he was okay. I wouldn't say he had a terrible competition.
But Kevin De Bruyne at his mercurial best will encourage and inspire a team not to be one of the worst teams in the tournament.
No, unfortunately, they were that bad. They were that bad.
We
can't listen. We can't be saying we as England, who made a final, had half a dozen players who were top players who didn't perform well at all. So there were many players at the European Championship who weren't at their best. We've just been hearing about the players taking FIFA to court because they're playing too many games. Maybe that says something about where we are in the state of football. I'd rather have De Bruyne for 12 more months than see him go to Saudi Arabia.
But you're not going to have him for 12 more months. Conservatively, you're going to have him for 15 more games.
Okay, but I'm telling you now, if they said to me, Kevin De Bruyne is going to miss most of the season, but you'll have him 90% of what he is at his best, but you're going to have him for the running, I'll take it. If I was a Man City fan.
But the economics. Oh, I think as a fan you would as well.
No, not because I love him. I'm a Manchester United.
No, as a fan.
In terms of winning, in terms of winning trophies when it matters, I would rather have him than not have him.
Of course, if you ask Guardiola or you ask a Man City fan, of course, because there's no jeopardy in it for them. A football fan will go, yeah, keep him for a bit. because they don't need to make the business decision. But the business decision is it's 50 million quid, which is brilliant for the club, plus offsetting his wages.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.